The purpose for the decree, according to the late British scholar William Barclay, censuses were then taken periodically in the Roman Empire for primarily two reasons. One reason was to enlist men into the military. This is why they would do a census. They would get all the people together, find out who was of age, and they would now be put into the military. Of course, the Jews refused to do this. They refused to fight for the Roman government. So that wasn't the reason why they were being registered, but another reason was to collect taxes. The Roman government was a big operation, a very efficient one, but even efficient operations need a lot of money if they are to function. And ancient governments, like modern ones, were constantly under the strain to find new methods of taxation. Fortunately, the United States, or the state of New York, is not that big of an operation and doesn't need a lot of money, and therefore they are not looking for other ways to find taxation from us. And as I pull my tongue out of my cheek, I will continue on. How did this play into God's hand for that first Christmas? Well, number one, it did to fulfill prophecy. A lot depended on the fact that Jesus was to be born in Bethlehem. In fact, Micah 5:2, "But you, O Bethlehem Ephratah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose origin is from old, from ancient days." Now here's the question: how do you get Joseph and Mary from Nazareth, about 70 miles north, all the way down to Bethlehem? That's where Joseph was from. He was from the Bethlehem area. That was his line and lineage, was from there. How do you get him down there? I did some radio spots, and I've been on the radio for some time. Somebody said I had a great face for the radio. I don't know what they meant by that. I took it as a compliment. But I did some spots recently entitled "Contemplating Christmas." It was suggested by the Christian technician that I work with that I do this, and what a breeze it was. Rather easy when you think about it. As a Christian, we talk about Christmas a lot, and there's a lot of things you can say about it and you can contemplate. One of them was this: why in the world would a woman, approximately 9 months pregnant, travel 60 or 70 miles, we assume on the back of a donkey, for this registration? I mean, that doesn't make sense. You wouldn't do it even today. You probably wouldn't travel all that distance if you knew you were that close. And I concluded by saying maybe that's why she gave birth right away when she got to Bethlehem, because of all that traveling. And maybe indeed it was. There's no reason for them to make this trip, except when Caesar Augustus said you needed to be taxed, you went and you were taxed, and you registered. And so we see how God uses this, one reason, to fulfill prophecy. A second reason, and this is somewhat speculation, but to form a unique picture. Jesus was to be the sacrificial lamb that would be offered up for the sins of many. For this picture to be seen, we need shepherds who watch over the temple sheep to be present soon after his birth. Again, somewhat speculation, but it is believed that the temple sheep were raised in the foothills surrounding Bethlehem. Jesus, of course, is depicted as a sheep to be slaughtered in Isaiah 53. And what a beautiful picture to see the shepherds of these sheep present at the birth with the ultimate sheep who is going to be sacrificed. Just kind of a neat picture that I think God portrays for us. Emperor Caesar Augustus could never have imagined in his wildest dreams that this little decree for a census and the world to be taxed would have such a profound effect. But it did. God used him. Now there's another government official that we have to recognize, and this one comes from the Matthew passage that was so eloquently read for us, and it's King Herod. And before we talk about King Herod's involvement, we've got to discuss the type of person that King Herod was. Herod was not a Jew. He was an Edomite. His father worshipped the Jewish God sincerely. His mother did not. He rose to power after a war between the Romans and Parthians, which is modern-day Iran and Iraq. And after Mark Antony and his lieutenants drove away the Parthians, Herod was brought back to Jerusalem as king under Roman rule. So he's under Caesar Augustus, but he's king of that area. Things started out pretty good, at least from a domestic standpoint. When it came to buildings and the economies, built a new wall around Jerusalem, built a citadel which guarded the temple. Coins were minted in his honor, no doubt with his inscription on it. He practiced Judaism, but was more of a multi-faith enthusiast. He would fit well today, I think, believing whatever anybody else believed. He knew how to please the Romans and to make sure they would continue to support him. He would send lavish gifts to their representatives in the East, Mark Antony, and to Mark Antony's mistress, Cleopatra, the queen of Egypt. And when they were dead, he formed an alliance then with Augustus. Herod had some major flaws, and we'll see the most glaring of them in a moment. However, the underlining flaw was that he was an insecure person, it seems. Having reached the heights of kingship, he never felt totally secure or loved, and he saw conspiracy and plotting from every quarter. What the man needed was a good hug, all right? But he never seemed to get it from anyone. And he thought everybody was after his position, and that's when the killings began. First of all, he killed his brother-in-law, who was the high priest. Now, this is not a good idea when you're the king of the Jews, all right, to kill the high priest. That wasn't a smart move. He went to Egypt facing murder charges because of this, which when he went, he told his uncle Joseph, he said, now listen, if anything happens to me, I want you to kill my wife and my mother, and her mother, rather. And his wife learned about this while he was gone, so when he came back, he figured Uncle Joe told her because he was having an affair with his wife, so he killed him. When in reality, Joe was trying to demonstrate how much Herod loved his wife, and that's why he told her. I'm not sure how that would show how much he loved them, but at any rate, he kills Uncle Joe. Well, then he kills his wife. This is his best wife, kills her because of jealous accusations from some of the other 10 wives that he had. He regretted this. He became filled with guilt, making himself mentally and physically ill. Then he killed his mother-in-law, just because. Because she presumed that Herod was about to die and wanted to have her grandsons, Alexander and Aristobulus, put on the throne. So he had them killed, because their half-brother, Antipater, accused them of wanting to take over the throne. Then he killed Antipater right before he died because he thought his son was trying to accelerate the dying process. Now, just before his death, Herod, realizing that nobody was going to mourn when he died, decided to get all the heads of the families to be brought to Jerusalem. This they did, and they locked them up in the horse racing ground. Here was the instructions he gave his sister upon his death. They were all to be killed. And if they were all killed, then there would be mourning in Jerusalem and in Israel, not because of him, but because their relatives were all killed. Fortunately, when Herod died, his sister released the imprisoned Jews and allowed them to return home. Now, having that as a backdrop, does anybody wonder at all concerning the fact that he killed all the children 2 years old and younger after hearing about a king being born in the city of Bethlehem? No, this is just modus operandi for this very wicked king. According to history, he died a grisly death. One person who kind of studied this out believes that he had chronic kidney disease and complicated by a particular nasty case of gangrene. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy, as far as I'm concerned. His decree is recorded in Matthew, and it came out of his insecurities. The story is about the wise men who come to worship the newborn king. These wise men thought that the sighting of a new star meant a royal child was born. And as we probe deeper and deeper into space, there's the scripture verses already read for us. You know, as we probe deeper and deeper into space, we sight and we find more stars all the time. Contemplating Christmas again, as I was working through these minute spots, I thought, does that mean that every time we find a new star, a new king is born? And if that's the case, we got a lot of kings living here in the world over and over and over again. Well, I'm not sure that that is the case. I do know that you can name a star if you'd like. They advertise this now. I think it's probably one of the greatest scams of all time. But if somebody's given this to you as a gift, I'm sure it's a very good one. You name the star, whatever name you want to have it, and they put in a copyrighted book in the Library of Congress. That does not mean that the star is actually named what you name it. It's just that that name is in this book, all right, in the Copyright Office. In fact, I can do something a little bit cheaper for you. We have a lot of trees at Pine Brook. I would be happy to name a tree after you, all right? $500, it's all it costs. I will put it into a copyrighted book if I have to. No, I'm only kidding. But seriously, the sighting of a new star, does that mean that a king has been born? Well, I'm contemplating that right now. I'm not quite sure. Does it mean that God used a myth to bring about his purposes to some degree? Because these guys believed that that was the case. Well, we could study that a little bit further, and maybe you've got some ideas you can share with me, but it sure does seem like God used something that these guys believed, which may or may not be true, to get them to where he wanted to. Again, the sovereignty of God being displayed. So they travel to the land, stopping at the palace. Where else would you go? If royalty is born, it must be in the king's house. And of course, Herod is beside himself. No one got permission from him for a king to be born. But where would it be? He also believed in the myth of a new star, meaning the birth of a king. So what does he do? Well, verses 3 through 5 indicate what he does. He calls these scholars together, and they read through the scriptures to find out that the king was to be born in a certain place. Now, what is the role that he plays? Well, number one, he's the link to the wise men. Herod became the key link in the wise men's research project to find this new king. Where else would they go but to the king? He helped by calling in the biblical scholars of the day, which leads to the second point. He enabled the prophecy to be verified. The scribes came in reading from Micah chapter 5, noting the prophecy that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. Now, I'm a Bible student, like many of you, and sometimes you see pictures in the Old Testament that are revealed in the New Testament. We call those types. Those are kind of neat, and some people, they are really good at this, and they see a lot of them. And sometimes I question them. Are you sure that really is a type? And sometimes it's very clear, because in the New Testament it identifies it as a type. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes the prophecies are very clear in the Old Testament, and they're in the New Testament, you see where they are fulfilled. Sometimes they're not quite as clear as we'd like them to be. Let me tell you something about Micah chapter 5. It's very clear, all right? It's so clear, and it just so happens that King Herod helped to make it even clearer for us. Where was Christ to be born? The prophet said in Bethlehem of Judea. Where was Christ born? King Herod found out that it was in Bethlehem of Judea. And we know for a fact that it was a proven case that that's where he was born. And so he enables the prophecy to be fulfilled, so to speak, humanly speaking. Thirdly, he tried to prevent it from happening. As you know, he appeals to the wise men to bring him word about this baby so that he could worship him as well. Oh, yeah, right. So that he could kill him. The wise men made a heroic decision after a dream not to obey this king. His goal was not to show honor to the new king, but to kill him. And of course, he may have aimed at preventing it, although, like Augustus, he had no idea what he was doing. Herod's government wasn't the last to try to put a stop to Christmas. There's a fairly long list of countries in our own day where one had better not celebrate Christmas publicly. So you have two rulers, one of the leaders of a small province, King Herod, and the other the head of the greatest government of ancient times. That would be Augustus. Each played his part in the first Christmas. Neither, however, intended to do so. They had no plans of being part of the Christmas story, but God used them, just like he did King Nebuchadnezzar. This does not end government's involvement in the overall story. 33 years later, after Jesus began his public ministry, both the presiding governor, Pilate, and Herod's son, now the governor of Galilee, tried Jesus. You remember the mock trials they had. They found no fault with him. However, upon the demanding recommendation of the Jewish leaders, they sentenced him to death. And of course, you know the story and its meaning. This was the purpose for which Jesus came into the world, to die for the sins of the world. It took the Roman government to bring that about, humanly speaking. God used the Roman government. And again, governmental leaders, unbeknownst to themselves, being used by God to further his purposes.